But if Adam had not eaten wheat, people would not eat each other. They flee from the servant, birds, and animals. Because you eat them, they flee from you.
What is Sufism? Sufism is to endure patience, to sever desires from the world. What is a rose? Desiring nothing from oneself, the world fades away, and the heart clings to the soul. Strange that until one dies, the garment of the world will not be relinquished. A madman cried and wept in vain, for the heart of love to burn without end. These poems capture the essence of the text's themes on Sufism, asceticism, and divine love. Heart and soul. The heart is like Moses, the soul like Pharaoh. The world is like a fiery basin. If Moses, with Gabriel's permission, touches the blazing basin, all is well. But if Pharaoh touches, countless tortures ensue. Thus, seeking fame with divine consent is faithful obedience, while seeking it out of mere desire leads to ruin. The path to truth. The path of truth is hard to tread. One must walk light and sever worldly ties. To reach the divine realm, worldly pleasures cannot bind one. With a bound foot, one cannot ascend to the skies. Love of the world while desiring God is impossible. The eternal reward. Souls were created 3,000 years before bodies, aligned in a row, gazing at the world. When the paradise appeared on the right, many souls desired it, but when the hell appeared on the left, few remained free from fear, crying out to God, ready for trials.
Suffering and devotion. Fasting for a week, I received a meal, but the bowl was spilled, and the water jug broke. Why do you test me with such sorrows, God? If you would give me the world but take away this sorrow, I would be content.
In the market. I went to the market and a Turk struck me. I was reprimanded. Don't you know him? He's a holy man. I replied, I'm not aware. I was drunk. Be at ease, do not worry about my state, for nothing wrong is seen in my vision.
From the story of Bayazid. When I saw him standing on the path, I was not aware of the pain at that time. If I had 100 wounds at that moment, they would not have appeared as wounds to my eyes. From the story of Shimun. In that fire where there is not a single bit of fidelity, it is not permissible to seek fidelity from it. The fire had some fidelity for a time. It gave you a moment of respite. You worshipped fire for a long time. May the hereafter burn. It is a strange affair.
From the concluding reflection on the nature of existence. If a single drop were drowned in the entire sea, why would you pour this sorrow as dust upon your head? It was better for the drop to be in the sea. Do not be like the drop without support due to this sorrow. When Alexander lay down in the earth, a sage said this over his grave. O king, you traveled much, but you did not travel like this one. You expanded the world like the heavens. Now your ship is cleansed from worldly wandering.
Ayaz was in a deep sleep when Mahmud Ghaznavi came to his bedside and awakened him from his slumber. Now that you are awake and have returned to yourself, I will leave. In the moment when you were without self, you were more than any description I could give. In that moment when I saw your soul flourishing, when you returned to yourself, the beloved was lost. You were not there. I was in your place. When you became a seeker, the sought became less.
Seeking maturity from an ascetic is forbidden, for an ascetic is like a fired brick, still raw, full of tears and burning. The lover, in his burning and tears, becomes like a candle. His burning and tears will eventually lead to the end. Just as a candle's burning continues through the night, so does the lover's burning and tears continue until the end. O lover, you burn in longing, your heart a beacon in the dark. The more you melt away, the closer you come to the essence of love. My heart is lost, not knowing where it is, and I am without a guide. If my heart is lost, how can I find a sign? When the heart is bloodied, what can I say of it? What can I tell wise men about the heart? My heart is where the beloved is. Where can I go to find this truth? He who is without a heart, what can he say of the heart's sign? Without a heart, how can he find a sign?
Man does not know how his life passes in vain, but when the bird of his soul flies out of the cage of the body, he will realize that he has kept this remarkable bird captive in a worthless trap, just as Adam fed the bird of his soul a grain of wheat and was cast out from the eternal paradise. Man does not know how his life passes in vain, but when the bird of his soul flies out of the cage of the body, he will realize that he has kept this remarkable bird captive in a worthless trap, just as Adam fed the bird of his soul a grain of wheat and was cast out from the eternal paradise. Here, the discussion of pain and sorrow ends, and the sheikh, to resume his argument about the protection of animals and the condemnation of meat eating, invents wisdom regarding Adam's consumption of wheat as follows. But if Adam had not eaten wheat, people would not eat each other. They flee from the servant birds and animals because you eat them. They flee from you. Undoubtedly, the second line was only mentioned so that the story of Hasan and Rabi'a could be tied in. Otherwise, it does not fit with the previous verses. As we have seen, the sheikh often adds a few verses at the end of his stories to create a segue for a new topic he wishes to discuss. The story of Hasan and Rabi'a Adawiyya, which serves as an allegory for the consequences of gluttony and indulgence, goes like this. Hasan of Basra once visited Rabi'a in the wilderness outside the city. A flock of wild goats and deer circled Rabi'a's hermitage. As soon as they saw Hasan, they fled and scattered. This affected Hasan deeply, and jealousy arose within him. He asked Rabi'a why the animals were friendly with her but fled from him. Rabi'a replied, "What did you eat today?" Hasan said, "There was some fat in the house, so I put it on the fire, added some onions and ate a meal of onion and fat." Rabi'a said, "Be just. Don't eat their fat and they won't flee from you." Then, the sheikh moves from criticizing meat eating to criticizing gluttony and indulgence. In the realm of the hereafter, several verses are composed to invite the reader towards truth. The term truth provides a way for the sheikh to define a Sufi, stating that a Sufi should be like the letter alif, straight and upright. From this, the definition of Sufism becomes evident. Sufism is to endure patience, to sever desires from the world. As Sufis define asceticism as the renunciation of worldly means, equivalent to severing desires from the world, The sheikh uses this occasion to address the topic. What is a rose? Desiring nothing from oneself, the world fades away and the heart clings to the soul. Shaqiq al-Balkhi once spoke on asceticism from the pulpit in Baghdad, urging people to be firm in their asceticism. He said, "I travelled the desert with only a piece of cloth in my pocket, performed Hajj, and returned, still with that same piece of cloth." A young man stood up and asked, "O Sheikh, if you had that cloth, where was your trust in God?" Shaqiq trembled and descended from the pulpit, acknowledging the truth in the young man's words. Strange that until one dies, the garment of the world will not be relinquished. And the accompanying tale is about a deranged person who wanted a shroud. He said, "I have no garment to wear, and if you are patient, I am not." The divine response was, "I will give you a shroud." The person replied, "Yes, but it is only fitting to provide the shroud when you take my soul, and I die." The tale illustrates that asceticism is not just about renunciation, but also about the determination to strive, surrender oneself, and achieve spiritual goals. If it is questioned why tears and sorrow should be considered adequate when God is beyond weakness and imperfection, the sheikh answers with the following story. A madman was crying and shedding many tears. Someone asked why he wept. He replied, "I weep so that my heart might burn." They said, "But God has no heart, and no wise person would believe otherwise." The madman responded, "How absurd! God possesses all hearts. How could he be without one?" The sheikh then explains that everything in this world originates in the divine, whether good or bad. He uses the example of Gabriel's role in both causing the destruction of Samaritans and the miraculous birth of Jesus to illustrate that even seemingly contradictory acts originate from the same divine source. Poem extract verse. It is strange that until one dies, the garment of the world will not be relinquished. The sheikh concludes by emphasizing that once truly dedicated to love, the soul will not suffer in the flames of hell. He narrates a tale about a fire in Baghdad, where a wise man, despite the danger, confidently walked home, trusting that God would protect his house because his heart was devoted to divine love. The poem concludes with the following verses. A madman cried and wept in vain, for the heart of love to burn without end. This narrative illustrates that while the divine is beyond worldly comparisons, genuine seekers understand and embrace the profound truths of spiritual love and dedication. Religions are often used as a pretext for attaining worldly positions and power. In this context, the general principle of the Sufis is invoked, which states that any action that aligns with divine command is obedience and a cause for salvation, while anything contrary to divine command leads to destruction. If it consumes honey, the soul is considered poison, while the heart, if it drinks poison, is considered honey. This idea is illustrated through an example derived from the story of Moses. The heart is like Moses, the soul is like Pharaoh, and the world is like a fiery cauldron. If Moses, with Gabriel's permission, reaches into the fiery cauldron, it is acceptable, and the fire will be transformed into peace. However, if Pharaoh tries to get it, he will suffer countless punishments. The conclusion is that seeking status with God's permission and from the heart is faithful obedience, while from the soul, it is purely destruction and sin. The text then introduces another issue. The afterlife is a realm of reward and punishment, and there is no room for acquiring and perfecting in that world, unlike this world, which is a place of perfection, a marketplace of acquisition, and a field for the afterlife. Whatever is sown here will be reaped there. Thus, one should abandon the pursuit of honor and wealth and focus on obedience, worship, and struggle. Everything other than the truth is a veil, and its account must be settled. To illustrate this idea, the text recounts the following story. Moses asked God to show him one of his special servants. He was told to seek in a particular valley. Moses found a man in deep spiritual immersion, lying with a brick under his head and a cloth up to his knees, while insects and bees swarmed around him. Moses greeted him and asked what he needed. The man replied, "Give me a drink from your pitcher." Moses went to fetch the pitcher, but the man had died when he returned. Moses, in astonishment, went in search of cloth and shroud. When he returned, he found that the man had torn open his stomach and eaten his heart and liver. Moses was deeply distressed and said, "Oh God, no one understands your intentions. This is how they treat their friends." The divine response came that man had always asked from God. This time he asked from you and created an intermediary. When the divine presence intervened, it was said, "When someone else intervenes, we remove them from our presence." Despite all this, until the account of that cloth and broken brick is settled, they will not enjoy paradise or smell its fragrance for years. From this story, it is inferred that the path to truth is complex, and one must travel light, breaking all attachments to attain an authentic and direct connection with the divine. One cannot ascend to the heavens while bound in chains, and it is impossible to love God and the world simultaneously. The heavenly beauty is not for those with impure intentions. Every soul and heart will be ruined unless one manages to reach the divine closeness, as the narrative suggests. God created souls 3,000 years before bodies and arranged them all in a single row. He then displayed the world to them. None of the souls inclined towards the world, and paradise appeared on the right. A tenth of them desired paradise until hell was revealed on the left. No one was left. They all fell into fear of hell, and a few remained who desired the world and had not yet been affected by the desire for paradise and fear of hell. God addressed them, "O foolish-hearted ones, what do you desire? You are free from both worlds." A cry arose from those pure souls, "O God, you know best, we want you and nothing else." God said, "Prepare and be ready for trials, for I will send upon you afflictions as numerous as the hairs of animals, the sands of the desert, the drops of rain and the leaves of trees. I will burn your chests with fiery coals." When those souls heard the divine decree, "May our souls be sacrificed for such trials, we accept your trials and begin the eternal life." From this joy a cry arose, "Whatever you wish for us, let it be." The text then continues with a related story. God created souls 3,000 years before bodies and arranged them all in a single row. He then displayed the world to them. Following the mention of souls, it is said that although all souls are connected to God, and each believes itself to be the actual possessor of the divine secret, the ultimate goal is one soul, and others are merely veils covering that soul. This refers to the hadith, "Had it not been for you, I would not have created the heavens." It also indicates that not all souls are equal in their closeness to God. For clarification, the Prophet's wives once asked him which of them he loved the most. The Prophet replied, "Wait until tomorrow and I will tell you." That night, he gave each wife a ring and instructed her not to tell anyone else. The next day, all the wives gathered and asked the Prophet. He replied, "I love the one to whom I entrusted the ring in private." When the wives heard this, they all privately rejoiced. They looked at each other and no one knew the secret, but each one had a sense of it. Though Aisha had a different concern. We should therefore act discreetly and keep our special knowledge within our closest circle. The Sheikh says that the solution is to strive and endure hardships with patience, as the love for the divine and the joy of the world cannot coexist in one heart. The following story demonstrates this. Rabi'a went a week without food, spending her days and nights in prayer and fasting. When her strength waned, a neighbor brought her some food. Rabi'a went to fetch a lamp. When she returned, the food had been spilled, and she broke the pitcher she was holding. She sighed deeply and said, "Oh God, what do you want from this burnt-out heart? And how long will you keep me in distress?" The divine response came, "If you wish, I could give you the entire world, but I would remove the sorrow from your heart, for my sorrow and love for the world cannot coexist in one heart." Behlul, distressed by children throwing stones at him, picked up a large stone and showed it to them, saying, "Throw stones at me like this, so if you break my leg with a big stone, I will have to pray sitting down." But his request did not affect the children, and they continued to trouble him with stones. Behlul, seeking escape from their mistreatment, limped away to Basra, leaving Baghdad behind. By nightfall, Behlul reached Basra and hid in a corner where a body had been left from a recent killing. He slept beside the corpse, and his clothes became stained with blood. The next day, some people passed by and found Behlul with the body, suspecting he was the killer. They asked, "Where are you from? Aren't you a local?" He replied, "I arrived from Baghdad yesterday and was unaware of the situation here. They said, 'You came from Baghdad to Basra to commit murder,' and took him to prison." Behlul thought, "If I had thrown stones at children, I wouldn't have been accused of murder here." The news was sent to the governor of Basra, and a trial was set. When they were about to hang him, he raised his head and prayed softly, and suddenly someone from the side declared that Behlul was innocent. "I am the murderer," said the accuser. Both men were brought before the governor. Having heard of Behlul and desiring to meet him, the governor was pleased to see him and honoured him greatly. The people recounted the murder and the confession. The governor ordered the execution of the young man who confessed, and Behlul said, "Do not kill him, as he is the cause of my salvation." The governor then compensated the victim's family and asked the young man about his confession. He said he had seen a dragon with an open mouth and flames, which said, "Get up and speak the truth, or I will kill you." Out of fear, he confessed to the crime. They asked Behlul what he had said in the underworld. He replied, "He who has washed his hands of life has perished, and now it is correct. I prayed and said, 'Oh God, this has been prepared by you once. What do you want from this poor heart? If they wish to kill me now, I seek not blood money from them. What good is a handful of scattered sorrow? I have you and no one else. My work is not free from your decree." Why are there worship and servitude if everything happens according to divine will? The Sheikh responds that although this is the case, worship is also commanded by the divine will. Even though one does not know whether the end will be happiness or misery, and this is uncertain, one should not abandon worship, as we are confident that while life endures, one must serve, and no one neglects a particular matter, nor does one turn to uncertainty or doubt. The Sheikh's statement aligns with the Hadith Act, for everyone is facilitated for what they were created for, and the Hadith Act, and do not rely, for my intercession will be for those of my Ummah who act. And if the chains are removed from the prisoner, he will not feel the pleasure of presence or utter a sigh of pain. For example, one day, Bayazid was passing through the market of money changers. They were whipping a mule so harshly that blood was pouring from its body, yet Bayazid was laughing and enjoying the sight. He even asked for more lashes, which astonished Bayazid to the extent that he stopped to watch until the situation was resolved. When the crowd dispersed, a certain elder asked him why he endured so many wounds without sighing or tears, and why he seemed to bloom like a flower under the lash. The elder wanted to understand the reason behind this ability to endure hardship with such joy. At that moment, the ascetic who was shunned by the world replied, "O Sheikh, my beloved was standing afar, having no task but observing. I was unaware of the pain when I saw him standing on the path. Even if 100 wounds had been inflicted upon me at that moment, I would not have noticed the pain." Bayazid thought, "O Bayazid, learn the path of religion from this vagabond." The Sheikh, with his profound wisdom, shifts the discussion and concludes that the true path can be learned from anyone, and personal characteristics such as lineage, nationality, and freedom are not considered in this quest. Those who are devoted to surrender have gained knowledge from the least of servants, as illustrated by the following story. Abdullah Mubarak was walking on a snowy road, and a cold wind blew. He saw a servant wearing only a single shirt and shivering from the cold. He asked the servant why he didn't ask his master for more clothes to protect him from the cold. The servant replied, "What should I say? He sees me in this condition." Abdullah Mubarak was moved and fainted from the impact of this realization. When he regained consciousness, he said, "We have been guided well." The Sheikh then explains that the hidden essence of what we do not know is in our genuinely distressed hearts. A heart wounded by truth travels the path quickly and becomes selfless, like the Ethiopian who came to the Prophet and said he would be forgiven if accepted despite his sins. The Prophet told him that God knows the truth and that nothing is hidden from him. The Prophet also mentioned that if someone else intervenes, it is removed from God's presence. In another story, a man who married but found no satisfaction in his wife due to shame and discomfort was distraught. He swore never to reveal her secret and to treat her flaws with kindness. The next day, the wife fell ill, and despite medical help, her condition worsened. The husband reassured her that he would never speak of her illness and kept it to himself. The wife, feeling ashamed, died soon after, and the husband, devastated, reflected on the nature of his feelings and actions. The Sheikh then narrates this story, melancholic, reflecting on how the soul's attachment and sorrow can overshadow reason. He critiques the contrast between his feelings of grief and the wisdom of accepting the ephemeral nature of life and death. The Sheikh concludes that the ultimate solution is annihilation, which he sees as essential for eternal happiness. A story supports this. Hasan al-Basri had a fire-worshipping neighbor named Shimun who had been devoted to fire worship for 70 years. When Shimun fell seriously ill, Hasan visited him out of neighborly duty and found him miserable. He advised Shimun to embrace Islam since worshipping fire had not helped him. Shimun asked for a written pledge of forgiveness and entry into paradise. Hasan wrote the pledge, and Shimun accepted Islam. After Shimun's death, Hasan dreamt of him in paradise, affirming that he had fulfilled his promise. Hasan al-Basri had a fire-worshipping neighbor named Shimun, who had been devoted to fire worship for 70 years. When Shimun fell seriously ill, Hasan visited him out of neighborly duty and found him miserable. He advised Shimun to embrace Islam, since worshipping fire had not helped him. Shimun asked for a written pledge of forgiveness and entry into paradise. Hasan wrote the pledge, and Shimun accepted Islam. After Shimun's death, Hasan dreamt of him in paradise, affirming that he had fulfilled his promise. The article concludes by reflecting on the Sheikh's experiences of seeking enlightenment and how he was guided through various trials and tribulations. Despite his deep inquiries and explorations, he found solace in complete surrender and reliance on the divine. This conclusion, drawn from the Sheikh's own journey, guides us towards understanding the complex interplay between worldly and spiritual wisdom. Spiritual enlightenment and love. The passage discusses the nature of spiritual enlightenment, emphasizing that proper knowledge and love are achieved when one transcends the self. The text suggests that when the light of divine knowledge shines upon someone and they grasp the essence of love, the world appears as a mere plaything, and the seeker realizes the futility of worldly attachments. The concept of fana, annihilation. A central theme is the concept of fana, or annihilation of the self. The passage implies that one must annihilate one's ego and worldly desires to attain true union with the beloved, or divine. This transformative process, as illustrated in the story of Ayaz and Mahmud Ghaznavi, shows how the self's desires and attachments disappear when one reaches a state of spiritual enlightenment, leaving the individual enlightened and free. The illusion of material wealth. The text criticizes the pursuit of material wealth and temporal power, suggesting that such pursuits are ultimately futile. It recounts a story where Alexander the Great is advised that true contentment comes from overcoming greed and attachment to worldly possessions, invoking a sense of disillusionment in the audience about the transient nature of material wealth. The transitory nature of life. Life is depicted as fleeting, and the text warns against wasting time on trivial pursuits. It advises living a life of spiritual awareness and integrity, rather than accumulating material wealth, which cannot be taken beyond the grave. The need for self-realization. The passage urges readers to look beyond superficial appearances and to understand that genuine wisdom and spiritual fulfillment come from within. It speaks of the importance of self-realization and inner transformation. The role of patience and acceptance. The text emphasizes patience and acceptance of divine will. It recounts stories to illustrate that true contentment comes from accepting what the divine gives and not being troubled by unfulfilled desires or expectations, reassuring the audience about the wisdom of patience and acceptance. Divine letter. A great man once said, "For years I have wished to give a charity to a beggar in such a way that no one sees it. An inner voice told me that the condition for this is that you should not see your charity and not become proud of giving it. The result is that a person is his own affliction and must find a remedy for himself, and the way to cure himself is through nothingness and scarcity." The result is that a person is his own affliction and must find a remedy for himself, and the way to cure himself is through nothingness and scarcity. In this regard, the Sheikh recounts a conversation with a friend who mentioned that a particular person consumes lawful food, and his sustenance is from the poll tax collected from Jews. The Sheikh replied that he did not know about that person's current state, but he knew that he was so faltering in the path of religion and knowledge that the Jews should collect poll tax from him. From this, he concludes that the sign of nothingness and annihilation of the self is to see oneself as lesser than everyone else. He further says that human existence is a mixture of being and non-being. Thus, hell and paradise are included within oneself. As long as there is a vein and root of non-being within him, he remains in hell, even less than a stone. In this work, outward cleanliness and bodily washing, which are the work of the pious, are insufficient. Worship without the purity of the heart and inner cleanliness is never acceptable, as illustrated by one of the elders of the path was sitting before the prayer niche with a head full of pride and pretense. An old, bent woman entered through the mosque door and said, "With all this impurity, what claim are you making? Get up from the prayer niche. The mosque is not a place for impure people." From this story, it is concluded that the path of asceticism is not without danger and destruction. Dry asceticism and self-denial are demanding, and sometimes asceticism becomes a form of self-admiration and ignites vanity. According to him, the best way is love, because love is accompanied by burning and melting, meaning that the lover gradually melts away, and due to the overpowering will of the beloved, rises to the level where his will becomes absorbed by the will